Hello, everyone. My name is Aprajita, and I'm a story scholar with the 1947 Partition Archive. And it is my pleasure to be your host today. Welcome to the 75 Days of Partition series. This is day 75 of hosting esteemed guest for the series, which is ending today. Keep watching us as this is the season finale, and today we are ending our show with great speakers. Our first speaker for the season finale is Mr. Krishan Kumar, a partition witness whose story is archived in the large collection of the 1947 Partition Archive. Let's welcome him with love and hearts. Krishan Kumar came to India as a young boy from Pakistan. Growing up in those traumatic years, through his own passion and hard work, he went on to become a serial entrepreneur. He co founded Mohan Fibre Products Limited, Asia's largest paper molding factory, which helped improve yields and returns for millions of farmers across India by reducing wastage and damage of produce. As chairman and managing director of MFPL in 2019, when the business was at its peak, he sold the company to Hartman, the world leader in paper molding. A Paul Harris Fellow of Rotary, Christian has been at the forefront of charitable causes. His passion is collecting artworks and mentoring young people. A husband, father, and grandfather, he is now spending his retirement years with his family and pursuing his passions. I welcome you, Mr. Krishan Kumar. It is a
I
great
I
pleasure to.
ap- I appreciate the time you are given to me. I will try my best to give you all the details, whatever, and not whatever. I still remember last time also you mentioned that I remember everything, and I will try to give you the absolutely perfect answers. Thank you.
Thank, thank you so much, sir. So I'll begin by asking about, from the first question about your origins. You tell us where you were born and what you remember of your childhood. Tell us, please, where you were born.
Well, uh, um, I was born in Karachi. It was a military hospital, and at that time, our senior most, my mummy ji was settled in Karachi at that time, and as usual, my mother went to her bhabhi's house for the delivery. So I was born in Karachi. Beside
So,
that,
yes.
yeah. And should I continue with the other incidents which had happened there, or is it all right?
Yes, please, please, you can tell any incidents that you
Let
remember.
Yes, yeah. I Later on I came to know from other senior members of the family that after third day, second day or third day of my mother giving birth to me, I was, you see, in the labor room. I was shifted from my mother to some Mohammedan lady, and later on we came to know that it was an intentional movement because that Mohammedan lady was a rich woman, and she has already got about nine girls, and they wanted to have now the boy. So with the uh, um, she was gave that old lady has given some money to the nurses over in the hospital, and who changed uh, from male child to female child, as in those days it was quite frequent when these types of mishap used to occur. Next is that when my Mamiji, Vidya Devi, was uh, returned from her home, and she was told, she saw in those, it was quite normal, she saw that the infant which I have left is not there. So she started shouting on the staff that I have left a male child, whereas now I find that it is a female child. So all the staff members got together, and it was a big hangama in the military hospital at Karachi. So after few hours or inquiry, whatever they have done it, is that I came back to my return to my mother, and I was told that many times later on, I was always taunted when because I was a very naughty child, and I was in those I was as because I was very naughty and used to cheat in young age. Uh, cheese the other woman, and they used to tell me ये मुसलमानी का दूध पीता है ना वही बोलता है. So this was a joke of the tongue, joke of the family. So these are the things which were narrated by my other aunts or uncles, and after few days, so my grandfather, who was also a doctor, they brought my, I mean, back to Lalpur. And then I was staying with my grandfather in Lalpur with the growing of age and so on. So Lalpur is a very beautiful town, well planned like Chandigarh. So my grandfather was retired from civil service, civil dispensary in Lalpur, and at that time, you see, because my grandmother was also very old, so she was not very easily take care of me because of her age. So, and in those days, you see, Pakistan, it was going on that someday the India and Pakistan will divide, and people will migrate from Pakistan to India, and India to Pakistan. So at that time, India used to be called as that Hindustan, and for a few months, my father was shifted to on the army duty, Burma, Second World War, and for few months he was on deputation with the army. So at that time he was known as Captain Dr. Mohan Singh. So at that time, and this was the, and he was a very respected gentleman, and I have got his recommendation letters from his seniors, which are still in my library, and those libraries has very clearly mentioned that my whole family believes in charity and God fearing, and so the life was going on. So we in Pakistan, where we were settled is Lalpur, and I understand that the road or the lane is still there in Lalpur. And now that they have changed the name, my daughter Enma, who is settled in now America, so she has been able to get the information from Google that you see that what is the name of that lane. It is known as my grandfather name was at that time Dr. Shamlal Singh. In those days, you see, if two family members are there, so one was used to made a Guru ka Sikh and the other was Saidari. In those days, there was no difference and people used to feel happy and proud of it to giving their one of their member as a Guru ka Sikh. So my father name was written as Captain Dr. Mohan Singh or Captain Dr. M.L. Singh. So, and I had a uncle, Dr. Trilok Singh. He had also gone to the army for few months only, and my father had a sister. So she was also married and was staying. They migrated to Ghaziabad much earlier than Pakistan was created. So when my father returned from army duty, so at that time my father was posted in Karor Pakka. Karor Pakka is a place near Multan, a very deserted, unplanned city. So at that time, so everybody, and it was a big hospital. My My father was a eye surgeon and a very well-known surgeon. His first preference was eyes. So at that time, he used to work like a devoted doctor. And uh, in my we were three brothers and two sisters. Later on, in 15 or 16 August, when the British government declared Pakistan and India. So at that time, we migrated from Pakistan to India, and my father was detained in Pakistan ਕਿ ਡਾਕਟਰ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਕਿਸ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਜਾ ਸਕਦੇ ਹੋ ਉਹ ਕਿਹਨੂੰ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਨੇ ਇਹ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਲੋਕੀ ਜਿਨ੍ਹਾਂ ਦੀਆਂ ਡੈਡ ਬਾਡੀਜ਼ ਆ ਰਹੀਆਂ ਨੇ ਜਿਨ੍ਹਾਂ ਦੀਆਂ ਧੜ ਨਾਲ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੈਗੇ ਪੰਜਾਬੀ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਤੇ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਤਾਂ ਬਗੈਰ ਰੈਸਟਾਂ ਛੱਡਿਆ ਨਹੀਂ ਜਾ ਸਕਦਾ so we were separated um, um, from from my father and my mother, my very wise and kind lady, who has given us all the support. I I still remember her and miss her.
So when the partition happened, your father was posted as Karol Pakka. So
Yeah,
what?
at Karun.
So what happened next? What did your family experience at the time of partition, and how did you come to India?
But you see, it was all very no food to eat. It was hardly we used to make ends meet, and whereas in when our father used to be with us later on, who joined later on with the family, but after 7 to 10 days, and we left the Karol Pakka train for Firozpur. My father's one of the cousins who was in the police forces. He took care of us and he gave us all love and affection. But in those days, You see, when people left every utensils, every cloth, every money, and all kids were very young. I was 8 years of age at that time, and my elder brother unfortunately got typhoid. He was in class 10th, but he had a malaria. No, he has a typhoid. So in those days, those you see diseases, nobody heard it, and there was hardly any treatment available there. And so ultimately, when my father landed in Firozpur, after 2 3 days, he took us to Ghaziabad, where my pupa was staying. And so, in that case, the moment we landed Ghaziabad, there is a mahalla. I still remember it. It is known as Choti Bajaria and Badi Bajaria. So my pupa was staying in Badi Bajaria, and we hired a house on rent, about 20 rupees a month or something like that only, 2 rooms house. And so at that time, as I used to be very naughty and youngest brother, and I used to get lot of beating from my father when he used to come back from his duties, and so mother was always annoyed. So in those days, to get a good type of beating is quite normal. Otherwise, perhaps whatever hard work we have been has been achieved, perhaps that would have not been achieved. And in those days, I remember because uh, my in the afternoon, it was a very summer day. I used to get a bicycle on किराया दो आने का किराए पे लेके उसमें बीट लेनी बीट किराए को के पीछे बांधनी और उसके बाद वो उसका आटा बनवाना और बनवाने के बाद उसको और दोपहर के बाद अपने साइकिलिंग भी हो जानी और घर का काम भी हो जाना. At that time, my brother, everybody was very. My nickname at that time used to be Baby. Baby. My full name is Krishan Kumar, and fortunately, my wife name is also nickname is also Baby. So it was fun. It was not one never used to get annoyed, but just because of that, uh, and the same I try to when I grown up. I remember if I was getting good beating, I gave my son also, Brajesh Kumar, a good beating because he is also like me. You steady and nice people, and especially me. And then it is all part of the game.
So you also share with us that what were the hardships and problems that you faced when you were trying to rebuild your life after migration.
You see, when temporarily we shifted to Ghaziabad, our grandmother used to stay with us, and my father was trying to locate his directorate health services, where they are located, to whom report, and rejoin the duty from whom to get the money. Sorry. So in that case, during that period, you see, my father first posting after we settled down in Ghaziabad. First posting was in Jalalabad. Jalalabad is a place near Firozpur, and it has also got a very large hospital. Over there, the doctors, no, the patient capacity was 110 patient can be accommodated in that. So after 15 days or a month, I our father used to come and take care of us, give us dal, roti, vagara, whatever money he used to save. Then he used to stay with us, and then, as I have mentioned earlier, uh, my mother one of those days told my father, "Ke bhai, listen, I can take care all the other children, but I cannot take care of baby. Kindly take him there to that village dispensary or customer dispensary." So at that time, and after we stayed there for a few months, and again on humanitarian grounds, the my father was transferred from from to Malot. At that time, Malot was a good place, semi-urban, near Khanna. Khanna is a place in Ludhiana district. So that was a higher category of hospital, and people, because of my father's good approach and good record, and they transfer him from Khanna, from Jalalabad to Khanna. So and after every 2 years, you see, we used to get transfer orders, and because there was no furniture, no beds, slowly and gradually we used to get all these things made and try to that the family should stay with the father and mother together. So at that time, you see, matriculation was there, plus two नहीं थी, तो मैट्रिक का टाइम आ गया एग्जाम देने का. तो my elder brother, his name is Mr. Tapishore Kumar, and he very intelligent. He was a good planner, uh, not so much hardworking as I used to be, but he was a very intelligent boy. Second brother name is Mr. Love Kumar. So he was interested in engineering. So he got the admission in Khanna, Nilokheri Polytechnic, uh, and completed his engineering from there. And after few years, he migrated to Germany. He says, "I want to go in. Germany is a better place." So somehow, चाहते हुए या ना चाहते हुए, पैसे तो होते नहीं थे. कभी किसी रिश्तेदार से ले, कभी किसी से बैक करके ले. तो so third I was. Then next to me was my sister. Uh, my father was very fond of her, and she was a nursing officer in the army. So Papa put her to the nursing medical college, and she completed her nursing graduation from Shimla. And after that, she got the employment in the military hospital, and she was recruited in the army hospitals. And then my fifth sister was also a chubby, or who later on, you see, later on migrated to Shimla, and no, we later on came to अपना चंडीगढ़. सो चंडीगढ़ में फिर ये सब मोरलेस फैमिली हेडक्वार्टर चंडीगढ़ बना. और उसके बाद देन यू सी she was able to complete her graduation from Government College for Girls in Chandigarh. And at that time, you see, everybody was trying to help each other. So that was, and as you have seen, that I was the first family member who was entered into business. Otherwise, all the family members were doctors' family. सो हर एक ने अपनी अपनी मेहनत करके और एक दूसरे की हेल्प करके हम लोगों ने वी वर एबल टू विद द काइंड गाइडेंस ऑफ माय मदर एंड माय फादर and you see we started uh, having our small house, small after Khanna. Then my father asked me, where do you want to settle? Khanna is he says Khanna is a better place, small city, कम खर्चे. मैंने कहा नहीं बाबा, अब तक जो आप करते आए हो मैं करता आया हूँ. I would like to settle in Chandigarh. Chandigarh is a well-planned, well-known city, and I would like to. So after then he says because you are not very very intelligent, and my mother used to cry a lot कि भाई ये सारे जने कोई कितने जर्मनी पहुंच गया है, कोई दिल्ली यूनिवर्सिटी चला गया है, सिस्टर ने नर्सिंग ग्रेजुएट नर्सिंग कर ली है एंड बेबी का की होएगा. सो उन्होंने कहते ने एक दिन कैजुअली सब लोग बैठे हुए थे तो उन्होंने क्या कोई नहीं महेश जी फिक्र ना करो किनू कहते ने थोड़ा खोटा सिक्का भी कम आ जाएगा. सो with the grace of God and everything, all everybody settled down, and then I told my father I want to settle in Chandigarh. So my first venture in Chandigarh was I got a training from my father's oldest friend, C. Bhan and Company at Ludhiana. And so I came to know under his guidance कि कैसे केमिस्ट की दुकान चलाई जाती है, कैसे बिजनेस किया जाता है, with money or without money. So we were able to first business plot जो लिया for running a chemist shop was Sector 19 under the name of Kumar's Chemist. So after getting training and all tricks of the trade for a few months, I was later on I started my own venture, and my brother, my eldest brother, Tapishwar Kumar, he post graduation उन्होंने करी Delhi University से. You see, the main thing is that our father never objected अपना education. They were, everybody was, जितना पढ़ना पढ़ो, रोटी खानी है कि नहीं खानी, भूख लगनी है कि नहीं करनी, but everybody should work hard and do the work honestly. So
सर अपनी
in
जर्नी शेयर करने के लिए सब चीज़ों के बारे में इतने अच्छे से विस्तार से बताने के लिए आपका बहुत शुक्रिया. आपने अपनी जर्नी के बारे में एक किताब भी लिखी है, रिफ्यूजी एंटरप्रेन्योर. आप उसके बारे में कुछ बताएं, क्योंकि ये जो टाइटल है ये जो दूसरे रिफ्यूजीज थे यहाँ पे आके उन्होंने कैसे स्ट्रगल किया, काम किया, अपने लिए नया मकाम बनाया, तो उसको भी रिफ्लेक्ट करता है. सो आप हमें अपने बुक के बारे में बताइए कि व्हाट इंस्पायर्ड यू टू राइट दिस बुक एंड व्हाट मोर इज कंटेन्ड इन देयर.
उसमें बेटे ऐसे है कि भी when I at the age of 84, I you see everybody was growing increasing, getting old and old. So at that time, one company, Hotman of Holland, they knew that ours is a very successful venture. So, and they were in Europe, they were the largest paper molding products producer. So, whenever they used to come to India, they wanted to have some opening for themselves in India so that they can enter into Asian market. Over there, then after 2, 3, 4 visits, in the year 82 or 83. Okay. And you see, at that time, then we thought maybe everybody's growing and we should do something. Everybody, you see, one after the other. Uh, my elder brother got married, then my second brother also got married. And then when all these things were going smoothing, everything, everybody was happy and try to settle down in their own life. So in that case, you see, um, my my elder daughter, younger daughter, Enma Popli, you see, who is nowadays settled in Houston, America. Her husband is a CEO of Mahindra and Mahindra, and she persuaded me. She has done MBA from Punjab University, Chandigarh, and after that, you see, she, her husband, my other daughter, they all persuaded me, her husband, that we know now you have done a lot. Now, whatever you are telling us is unless otherwise you write it down, how your grandchildren will come to know that what you have achieved and what the other grandchildren will be able to achieve unless otherwise you pen down your experience. So I told them, no, it is now I will not be able to do it. So in other words, my daughter is that type of daughter जो पीछे पड़ जाती है तो छोड़ती नहीं. So next morning again I got a call and she said, no, you have to do it. I have talked to all the family members. They said, no, Papa has to do it. So in that case, you see, I started writing my notes, rough notes, and she was every second day, third day, she used to give me the lecture कि नहीं फिर आपने ये प्रोग्रेस पूरी नहीं चल रही है, you must do fast, otherwise it will be too late. So it took me, and then during that period, it was also discussed कि उसका नाम क्या रखा जाए. So that way, as I was getting older and older, so thought that be refugee people don't know who are refugees and what they have done in their life. So in that case, you see, with the grace of God and the blessings of my parents, that in 6 to 8 months' time, I was able to complete the writing on the walls and starting rewriting second time, and about 7, 8 months, the writing work was over. And in again, my elder daughter and younger daughter, she located somebody in Chandigarh and a good printer, good writer, and printer. So we were able to uh, finalize the uh, everything, and it another took in the meantime, बेटे कोरोना आ गया. तो कोरोना की वजह से सारे काम जो है वो डिले हो गए. तो और उसके बाद उसको फिर रीराइट किया एंड सो यू कैन से फ्रॉम दी देन दे सेड कि भी नहीं यू सी कभी आपके बर्थडे से पहले पहले इसको रिलीज होना चाहिए. So twice she came from America, persuaded me, and all my children are very good, and they asked me to complete the job, and we were able to complete it successfully. And you see, when the all the chapters it contain, all the chapters were completed, and it was launched in Rotary Club, main Rotary Club, Chandigarh, and and so it was good because after many months, a Rotary club meeting was organized because of Corona. And there was a gap between the functions and government not useful all the thing. So in that case, um, 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 Justice, I will remember, I will let you know, Justice of the High Court,
Deep Singh.
he, uh,
Just Justice Deep Singh.
yeah. So Justice of High Court, he released a book along with my friends and family members. You will be able to see in the books. And so all my Chandigarh friends with you young girls like you are there to support me, and it is in the market. So whosoever, my main purpose was that we wanted that only if इस बुक को पढ़ के कुछ लोग भी अगर एंटरप्रेन्योर बन जाए तो देन माय एम विल बी कंप्लीट. सो एंटरप्रेन्योर्स मतलब वो वही होता है कि जो गिरता है खड़ा हो जाता है, गिरता है खड़ा हो जाता है, अपने आप को अपने आप सीखता है, सीख सीख के अपने आप ही फिर खड़ा होता है. सो इट वाज ए वेरी वेरी चैलेंजिंग जॉब. एंड आई वुड लाइक कि भाई आप जैसे यंग एंटरप्रेन्योर जो हैं वो उसको जरूर पढ़ें, और उनको किसी किस्म की कोई मेरी हेल्प चाहिए या कोई मेरे से कोई क्वेश्चन करना है, आंसर करना है, आई एम ऑलवेज अवेलेबल टू गाइड देम.
थैंक यू सर. आई एम श्योर कि जो आपकी किताब है उससे यंग जनरेशन को बहुत कुछ सीखने को मिलेगा. जो मेरा अगला सवाल है आपसे वो ये है कि कोई ऐसे नॉस्टैल्जिक फूड या कोई और फेस्टिवल्स हैं जिनको जो आपको याद दिलाते हैं आपके मुल्तान में जो घर था उसकी.
कैन यू रिपीट इट अगेन बेटे? जस्ट रिपीट द क्वेश्चन
आर
अगेन.
हाँ जी, मेरा सवाल है कि आर देयर एनी नॉस्टैल्जिक थिंग्स लाइक फूड, festivals that remind you of your home in Multan?
You see, my mother was a very religious lady, and हमने ये बुक जो लिखी है वो अपने बच्चों और संत करतार सिंह कंबालिये वाले की मेमोरी में ये बुक को पाइल अप किया है. तो उनकी यूसी उनकी यानी ब्लेसिंग से ही हम आज इस जगह पे पहुंचे. Whenever there used to be some problems, maybe technical, maybe family problems, और उन दिनों में ये फैमिली प्रॉब्लम्स को सॉल्व करना आपके पास कोई गाइडेंस नहीं अवेलेबल होती थी. तो उस चीज़ को सॉल्व करते हुए हम लोग इस जगह पे पहुंचे, Or then you see, after that, everybody, कोई अमेरिका चला गया, कोई स्विट्जरलैंड चला गया, कोई दिल्ली यूनिवर्सिटी चले गए, और बस दिस इज आई विल से कि all these blessings are without teamwork, without the blessings of your parents. आदमी जिंदगी में अकेला कोई काम नहीं कर सकता। और नई जनरेशन को मैं यही कहूँगा कि ना ही इस बारे में सोचो कि भी आप अकेला ये कर लोगे वो कर लोगे। अगर जितना उसको नेगेटिव तरीके से सोचोगे, उतना उतने ही ज्यादा फेल्योर हो गया। तो इट इज बेटर टू सर्व द पीपल एंड ट्राई टू बी रिलैक्स्ड। हार्ड वर्क होना चाहिए आदमी को। और देन आई थिंक अगर आप अपनी लाइफ में हार्ड वर्क करोगे और किसी को धोखा देने की कोशिश करोगे, तो देन यू विल नेवर बी सक्सेसफुल। बाकी माई माई वाइफ इज ए गुड कंपेनियन, और my children are very good, and so I have got no regrets, absolutely no regrets. मैं accept this कि मैं अपने पेरेंट्स को बहुत याद करता हूँ। और उसके बाद वो ओल्ड, जैसे जैसे ओल्ड होते गए, ऐसे तो होते नहीं थे, तो बेटे, तो तो उसकी वजह से सो मिस करता हूँ। ठीक है, एवरीथिंग इज फाइन, सब ठीक हो जाएगा।
सर,
और
जब
आप
मेरी
बताइए
आपसे पिछली बार
अपना।
बातचीत हुई जी, जब मेरी आपसे पिछली बार बातचीत हुई थी, तो आपने एक
हाँ जी।
डोली डोली की रोटी और उसका पूरा प्रिपरेशन मेथड बताया था, और ये भी बताया था कि ये मुल्तान में जब आप रहते थे तब बनाते थे। उसके बारे में बताएं।
अपना वो ये रेसिपी डोली की रोटी जो है जी, ये मेरी मदर ने अपनी माँ से सीखी थी। उन्होंने फिर आगे एजुकेट किया मेरी वाइफ को। तो वो मेरी वाइफ ने मेरी मदर से सीखा। तो अभी हम वो वो ये समर, एक्सट्रीम समर की ये प्रोडक्ट है जी। और उसके मुताबिक वो जब भी सब सारी फैमिली इकट्ठी होती है, तो वो उसको बनाने की कोशिश करती है। बाकी ये है कि भी मैंने अपना लाइफ में मैं आई आई हैव गॉट नो रिग्रेट। आई हैव गॉट नो, आई एम मोर देन सेटिस्फाइड। एंड मैं आपको भी कहूँगा, सुनने वालों को भी कहूँगा कि भी वो अपना बस परमात्मा का शुक्र करके, और दे शुड बी, वन शुड बी ग्रेटफुल टू गॉड, और उसके मुताबिक वो आगे चले। और लाइफ में जिंदगी सारी अच्छी चलती जाएगी। और ये जो जो आजकल जो लोग समझते हैं कि बगैर काम किए आदमी को सक्सेसफुल में सक्सेस होता है, वो आई डोंट थिंक इट इज ए गुड वे ऑफ करना। कभी कभी कि बगैर काम करे को काम मिलता है, नो, इट इज नॉट ट्रू। इट इज यू हैव टू वर्क हार्ड एंड सो दैट, बच्चों को प्यार करो, और बंदे यू विल बी सक्सेस। देर इज नो सब्स्टिट्यूट, देर इज नो बेटर सब्स्टिट्यूट टू हार्ड वर्क। देर इज नो सब्स्टिट्यूट।
सर, अभी हाल ही में जैसे बहुत सारी न्यूज़ आई थी कि कुछ लोग जो हैं वो वापस पाकिस्तान जा पाए अपना पुराना घर देखने के लिए। क्या डू यू आल्सो विश दैट यू कैन आल्सो मेक दैट जर्नी, एंड व्हाई?
यस बेटे, मेरे मन की भी तमन्ना है कि भी क्यों कहते हैं कि जब भी मौका मिलेगा तो मैं क्यों कहते हैं अगर ज़्यादा नहीं तो लालपुर तो ज़रूर जाना पसंद करूँगा कि भी अगर वो को कुछ एक्चुअली ये होता है, थोड़ी देर के लिए चीज़ नॉर्मल होती है, लोग आना जाना शुरू करते हैं। मैंने अपने आई एम ए मेंबर ऑफ द रोटरी क्लब चंडीगढ़ एंड मैंने यहाँ अपने सीनियर कई जो मेरे से पुराने सीनियर रोटेरियन हैं, मैंने उनको कई दफ़ा कहा है कि भाई अगर कोई प्रोग्राम ग्रुप का प्रोग्राम बने तो लेट अस ऑल गो टुगेदर एंड ट्राई टू visit at least Lalpur. And sometimes I do get the news from other people कि भी गवर्नमेंट लिबरल हो रही है और लोगों को जाने की इजाज़त देगी, तो जैसे जैसे एज एड मैन आई विल बी एबल टू गेट द opportunity, I will definitely go there.
I think it will be fantastic if you get that opportunity.
Yeah,
And please do
and
share whenever you do. It would be great to know your experiences of revisiting your house.
thank you very much. Uh, I will like to invite you. You come and have my place along with your friend and have a cup of tea or coffee with me. My grandchildren, they remember you. My wife remembers you, and you also people should encourage the old people and try to mix with them.
Thank you so much, sir. Um, there's
Thank you.
just one last question that I
Yeah.
would like to ask you before we sign off. Uh, do you think that so much bloodshed happened at the time of partition, and so many killings were
Mm.
there? Do you think this could have been avoided at the time of partition? Was there a way?
There's, you see, if you go through the history, the other day also, whenever there is a occasion, I you do get the articles and go through them. You see, it is all. You see, basically, people don't want all this bloodshed or this halla gula. They just want. Everybody wants to have a peaceful life, and they want they should come here, we should go there, and one can very easily adjust with each other, and there is no problem. And the moment the Pakistan understand this thing, you see their economy will also improve, and our country will also be very happy. Because you see, interestingly, you see our country is a very rich country, and they have got lot of technology with us, and we have got lot of experience. And our country is a big country as compared to Pakistan, but one is never too late. Who knows what happens tomorrow?
Thank you, sir, for coming here today and sharing your experiences of partition and your valuable thoughts. Uh, we are very glad, and it is a great pleasure that you were here today. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I am honored that you have invited me. I am always available.
Thank you, sir. And
Thank
those
you.
who are joining us, please be online to join for our second speaker of the session, Professor Gyanendra Pandey. My co host Azim Khan will be continuing from here, and it has been my pleasure to be your host for this series. Thank you for your love and support, which you have been showing to us and me in the comment section. Over to my co host Azim Khan. We will be back in a few minutes. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah. Uh, can you hear? I can't hear you.
Sorry. Hello, everyone. Sorry, my mic was muted. Um, Welcome to the 75 Days of Partition series. This is our final day of hosting esteemed guests, and we are welcoming the second speaker of the evening, Professor Gyanendra Pandey. Professor Pandey was trained at the University of Delhi, India, and the University of Oxford, UK, where he held his Rhodes Scholarship and Nuffield College Graduate Scholarship before taking up a research and teaching fellowship for 4 years. Since then, he has held tenure appointments at many leading universities and research institutions. He is a founding member and leading theorist of the Subaltern Studies Project. Professor Pandey has written exclusively on colonial and post colonial South Asia, nationalism and minorities, civil rights and democracy, and the history of history writing. At Emory, Professor Pandey has been active in developing a dialogue between historians and social scientists working on the global north and south. He has a long list of publications and is currently working on two books. One, a comparative study of the practice of democracy, past and present. The second, a history of 20th century India as seen from the location of family and home. Thank you for joining us, Professor Pandey, and welcome.
Thanks, Azim. You can hear me clearly?
Yes, we can.
Okay, good.
So I'll jump straight in, Professor. Is your work on partition purely academic, or is there some personal connection there as well?
Uh, that's a broad question. I'm not quite sure how to proceed. Look, we, those of us who were born after partition and independence grew up in northern India, in any case, grew up with stories of partition, whispered accounts, grew up also with an awareness that people in India and people in Pakistan saw both sides as home in some ways. So that's the extent of my personal connection. My father was posted. He was an emergency commissioned military officer during the Second World War before he went in returned to the civil service. He was posted for a while in the Northwest Frontier Province at Landi Kotal, actually. So he talked about that. He talked about the very nice times he had there and what he missed and so on. But my work really personal in this sense. It was inspired, sparked off by events that were happening in the 1970s and 80s in India. Most immediately at the point when I began to work on it, by the violence against Sikhs in Delhi and other cities of northern India, which many people saw as a replication of things that had happened during partition. And it was happening in our midst. It was happening in areas and localities that are not normally troubled by violence. There was this violence always took place somewhere else. Suddenly it was right there. And all sorts of people you knew were affected in one way or another, even to the extent of sympathizing with the attackers. So that's really what got us back. People were saying this is like partition all over again. And many of us, myself included, then focused much more directly on the history of partition once again. We were asked to talk about it all the time. I was talking and writing about it in various ways anyway. But I then focused on partition and wrote the book in the years following.
And what we saw conventionally at that time was that the history of partition usually centered on what occurred in the halls of power. But you wrote about it from the vantage of the subaltern. And how did that come to happen?
Well, once again, Azim, we all write our histories in the context of the place we live in, the circumstances, political, social, intellectual debates around us. And I grew up and I went to college in Delhi in a time when all sorts of world-stirring events were taking place, which were very important to us. The Vietnamese struggle against the Americans, In the United States, the women's struggle, the African American struggle for civil rights, all of these things were enormously important, part of our heritage, part of our context. But also within India, the quite remarkable experiment with democracy and with a kind of middle path development, they called it a socialistic pattern of society. Um, all of that had brought dividends, had extended education and certain kinds of rights and certain kinds of opportunities to a very, very large section of the population, but it also stalled in a very significant way. And there was very real concern about how this country, our countries, could overcome the problems of poverty and deprivation and oppression of the poor and the downtrodden in terms of caste and class and so on. And so, in that context, our historical work, the research we were doing, the kinds of things we were interested in, was very much aimed at thinking, whose history have we been taught, whose history are we reproducing, and whose history do we need to write? And it was evident to many of us working in Calcutta, Delhi, and many other parts of India as well as abroad, that what we did not have adequately was a history of the vast majority of the people who in the subcontinent were still and continue to be to this day agricultural workers and the rural poor. And so I had begun to focus on that, and my PhD work was related to that, and subaltern studies emerged from that. I was already writing about communalism and other things with those questions in mind. How did these things affect the vast majority of the people, ordinary people? And so the move into partition was really, I guess one other thing I could say, was really just following in that stream. I was continuing to think, how were ordinary people involved? But that was brought home to me when I interviewed people, when I began talking, doing this research and talking to people. The memories of partition amongst people who had lived through it, amongst people who had suffered, were very different from the histories we were taught. They acknowledged the histories, but they told you very different things. And it was very much a feeling of a time, a reconstitution of people's beings, attitude, subjectivities. Their understanding of the world was transformed completely. Partition was a real, huge, colossal moment of violence which overturned so many lives. And that's the history they remembered. That's the history they were talking about. So that's the history I turned to as well. And there's just huge amounts of information if one's looking for it.
So when I was in my South Asian Studies program, I read some of your work, and you talked about memories and especially nomenclature of partition with regards to the memories of partition. And one thing that very interesting happened last month when I was interviewing some people in the villages of Miawali for the Partition Archive. And I mean, I read about it from your work, but I got to experience it for the first time, where people had no clue what partition or taqseem or all these words meant. And I was just like flailing around to find a word to get them to understand what I'm trying to say. And I found out that they refer to partition as Loti, which was the event where the looting happened, and they didn't see it in any other manner. And I personally found that very interesting, and especially with regards to your work about memory. And could you please tell us more about the distinctions you've made between memory and history with regards to partition?
Yeah, let me come to that in a moment. Just to pursue what you were saying about the terms that people use, because I wrote in that book that the way in which we name a historical event determines for us, has already written that historical event into a particular form. So to call it partition makes it a certain kind of thing. To call it genocide would make it a very different kind of thing. To call it civil war would once again open up different kinds of questions. And clearly, we needed to take all of those things into account. There was a constitutional partition, there was the formation of two different countries and division on a map. But to most people living through it, as you were just saying, that event was remembered as Halla, as Shorgul, as Markat, as in some parts of the country, Mashallah, which is martial law during that period. And so, in a sense, I wrote for that reason about the three partitions, and I'll come back to that if you want at some point. But to me, and it was very important to say, partition was the violence. It was not partition leading to violence. It was not violence leading to something called partition. Partition itself, the very moment that we describe as partition and independence, the partition part of it was fundamentally a colossal act of violence, which marked our histories in Pakistan, in India, in Bangladesh, in such fundamental ways that it's actually been an enormously difficult heritage, and one that your generation and ones to come will continue to struggle with and think about. On memory and history, I simply said this, that the notion of memory as something automatically authentic, it's the truth. It's unmediated, if you like, right? It's there, and if you can somehow access it, you've got much closer to authentic history, to the authentic feel of the time, events of the time, confrontations of the time, whatever. And I made the point, which I think many other people were making, that memory, especially memory that we are able to access, memory that people articulate, speak about, that we record or write down, is already mediated. It's mediated by huge numbers of things. It's mediated, for a start, in your case. I mean, if you or your parents or your grandparents' memories are something that you investigate, it will first be mediated by all that you have heard and read. And that was the case with these people whom I was interviewing 30 years, 40 years after the events that we are talking about. And they had read the textbooks. They had heard the great, nationalist narratives on partition. They all had the same story. That was the first thing that they would tell you. But they would then quite often break down once they got into a personal mode. And sometimes I had to say, इसको छोड़ दीजिए, ये बातें ज़रूरी नहीं है, मैं आपको तकलीफ देने नहीं आया हूँ. I didn't want to make this a difficult moment for them. And they would quite often say, just wait for a minute, give me a minute. And then they would tell those stories. And they would say, नहीं, ये मैं बताना चाहता हूँ या बताना चाहती हूँ. I really do want to tell the story. And something else poured out. And those memories are already, they are not the authentic, experience. There is no way of that being there. They are traces of things that they remembered. They are a very different way of representing that time. And so my thought was, and I hope the historians in general and scholars and wider intellectual publics are doing this to a large extent, that we are thinking about memory as another kind of archive. It's another kind of interpretation. The state presents us an archive. They're personal archives we have. This is an archive of a certain kind, already interpreted, already framed in ways that a community, that a nation, that a family frames stories that they are telling over and over and over again. So it's framed by those things. And we must take those into account as we use that archive, as we try and say, look, there are these different ways, different thoughts about the time, and use those traces, the many traces and the many articulations of what happened, to try and write one that will capture something of the impossibility, something of the difficulties, the contradictions, the complexity of any time in history, but particularly a time like that. A time, as I said, of enormous dislocation and tearing apart and suffering and joy at the same time, anticipation, the hope that Pakistan would be this pure land, that India would be this great democracy, all of those sorts of things.
And so you also teach partition in the class.
Azim, you might have to turn up the volume or something. I'm hearing you a little bit faintly.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'll try.
Or
So,
move forward or something.
okay. So, what are the methods you use when teaching partition in the classroom, especially considering it can be such a sensitive subject for so many people? And how do students respond in general to the non-traditional narratives, the subaltern narratives that you teach?
Yeah, Azim, that's a difficult one because I've taught in many different places, and the responses vary, of course, as they would. See, when I was teaching in Delhi, and I was teaching in Delhi till the end of the 90s, I moved to the States at the end of that century. There's kind of self-selection that goes on, both in terms of who comes to universities like the University of Delhi or Jawaharlal Nehru University or Calcutta University and so on. But also in terms of who takes particular courses. So I had what was not a compulsory course, but an optional course on communalism, for example, in Delhi. And you would get people who were interested in the problem, but they were interested in the problem because they thought of it as something that needed to be controlled and put down and, understood so that we could combat it. So, you've got a self-selected group of people. And I remember 3 or 4 students very early on in the time when I was teaching that communalism course, 3 or 4 very good students saying to me at the end of a semester or in the middle of a semester, saying to me, Gyan, and they used to call me as many students then did and still do, I think, to some extent. They would say, Gyan, we agree with everything you're saying. We're persuaded by what you're saying. But tell us what we should say, how should we proceed when we go to Jamna Par, when we go across the river Jamna in Delhi to an area that has been affected by Hindu-Muslim conflict and violence and is currently suffering, that sort of thing. How should we deal with it then? All these nuances, all this talk about communalism is a form of nationalism and so on and so forth, which was there in my book, would not necessarily speak to the problem that was immediately facing them and facing people like me when we went to those things, which is, how do you bring peace? How do you calm people down? How do you make them speak with one another and recognize that the community is greater than the incident or the problem that's arisen? And I had to say to them that, look, we must address audiences in contexts. That's the only way we can do it. And the context of an outbreak of serious violence is one where the first thing you do is you put out the fire. The first thing you say is, this is not on. It's not acceptable. An eye for an eye will make the entire world blind, as Gandhi said during the partition, correct? That if you go on with this thing, they've killed 20 of ours, we'll kill 20 of theirs, you're going to end up with everybody blind and dead in time to come. So you've got to do that. But I said, in the long term, we've also got to recognize that the problem is one that goes beyond something that we have neatly typed and set aside as communalism, as though some people are affected by religion and are sort of tyrannical, are extremists in that respect, and the rest of the population is not. Somehow there's some fundamental divide. And that nationalism somehow is not a problem. The nationalism in the subcontinent was from the beginning a vexed issue. Whose nation is this? And this is what subaltern studies fundamentally asked to begin with. Whose nation is this? Who are we fighting for? What sort of nation will it be? Will it be secular? What will be the place for Muslims, for Sikhs, for Christians, for Anglo-Indians? All those sorts of questions were very much part of the thing. What will be the place? It was not so evident to everybody then. It is obviously and critically evident today. What is the place of Dalits, the ex-untouchable groups, who are such a large part of the population of South Asia? And so I said, one has to take this to the question of what nationalism, which is a short and a peculiar moment in the history of humanity, allows and sometimes leads to, which is a chauvinism and exclusivism, which is itself the problem. And so I'm saying this because that's how I've addressed the question of partition normally when I have taught or spoken to a group of people for the first time. I make it a question of nationalism, of a time when in an anti-colonial struggle there was great idealism, great hopes for the future, but also this vexed quality, the uncertainty of what that nationalism or that anti-colonial struggle would mean for sections of the population that were thought of as minorities. And once you put it in that frame of thinking nationalism, which tends to be extremist in itself and become exclusivist and become chauvinist, as in these days everyone can see, it's becoming horrifyingly so. And the results in India, in the United States, in Russia, in China, I mean, you name it, in Hungary, in England, have been disastrous. This is all a result of a very narrow nationalism being interpreted in particular ways. And so I have taught the history of partition as part of the history of anti-colonial struggles and as part of the history of the making of nation states, which is open to many different possibilities and can go in many different directions. And once you take it to that level, it's not a critique of the people in Pakistan, the Muslim leaders who brought this about, or the Sikhs or the Hindu leaders who brought partition about. It's a critique and an appeal for thinking the kinds of societies and communities and polities, the kinds of futures we had dreamed of then, our ancestors, our fathers and grandfathers and mothers and grandmothers dreamed of, and we ourselves dream of. What kinds of histories do we want to make, right? And this has always, I found, in India, in the United States, in Britain, in wherever I've taught, it has always resonated with students. And it has even resonated with students who have come with right-wing views, who have come with kind of chauvinistic attitudes to the greatness of India or the greatness of Pakistan and the unfairness of various leaders in various moments in history. And so very quickly, they have come to see that there's really a lot more going on here and a lot more that we need to critique and understand and think about. So that's basically what I've done. And that's why the three partitions was an important moment in both in the book and in my teaching. Very often I begin a lecture on partition by talking about three partitions. Totally different views of what the future should be. You know, in the Muslim League resolution of 1940, it's autonomous states. It's not clear that they will even be necessarily independent states, just autonomous states where Muslims would have a significant and important say in preserving their histories, in building the future, and so on and so forth. In the Congress and Sikh response to that, which was, okay, if you must have partition, we will have the partition of Punjab and the partition of Bengal. It's a very different order of things because they are suddenly calling for the breakup of long-standing communities which share cultures, share languages, share food, share everything, live together. And you're saying, we'll break that off. They will not be able to. That's a very different kind of partition. And then the third partition, which is what we were talking about earlier, people saying, mashallah, people saying, markat. That is what partition was, right? And so when you take those three moments together, you already have made a historical moment, one that requires interpretation, requires rethinking. And there's very few students, I find, very few sensitive people of any kind, who would not engage with that. They may come out with somewhat different answers to yours because they have a different experience. But they engage with that, and it resonates with what is going on around us today, everywhere in the world. Therefore, it's a history that matters.
So, moving that question a little, making it a little broader, how do you think this current generation overall is processing partition?
Azim, that's a
In
question you can probably answer better than I can. Um, Once again, it depends where you are. I have to say, one of the rather more, what should we say, disappointing things that we see is that people forget very, very quickly. And there are people in India as well as in Pakistan, I have no doubt in Bangladesh as well, we haven't spent any time or asked this question, who do not even remember what partition was really all about. It's become a post-partition, nuclear war threatened subcontinent, which faces other questions. And so people have forgotten that history to a very large extent. And so, it becomes like that was some other people, some other time, a more primitive time. And the answer, of course, is if you discuss it, if you talk about it, you see the resonances, you see the parallels with so much that's happening around today. So I'm not quite sure how the vast majority of today's generation is processing partition. My guess is for the vast majority of ordinary students across the world, certainly, but even in the subcontinent and in countries like the US or Britain or Germany, where people talk about and teach about these things, I suspect that they don't think about it that much. It's not part of their immediate concern. But as students of history, as teachers of history, as intellectuals concerned with these things, I think we need to bring that to bear in our thinking about today. And we need to bring to bear many moments of that kind, which have been uncomfortable moments in our histories, which we cannot celebrate easily.
Yes, thank you so much for this wonderful talk, Professor Pandey. And I would recommend everyone to um, go and buy the book and read the book Remembering Partition, which is a seminal work in the history of South Asian partition, not just partition, but just even to this day, we can see it is such an instructive book to understand what's happening today in all of South Asia. And thank you so much for bringing the subaltern studies into the world and bringing the stories of ordinary people and the narratives of ordinary people to light. And that's something that we at the 1947 Partition Archive are also trying to do, leading on from your inspiration. And thank you so much for that. And for those joining us, please keep watching for our last speaker of today and this series, Bhai Baldeep Singh. We'll be back in a few seconds.
Thank you very much, Azim. Look after yourself, and my best wishes to the Partition Archive and all of you and the new generation, which has to process the histories we've lost and the histories we've gained. So take care. All the best. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us again. We are joined by our final speaker of the series, Bhai Baldeep Singh. He's a direct descendant of Guru Baba Nanak's disciple, Bhai Sadharan. Bhai Baldeep Singh is the 13th generation of a long lineage of Gursikh masters. His repertoire includes masterpieces that were first composed by the Sikh gurus and the Bhagats. He is also the prime exponent of the oldest gharana of classical percussion and pakhavaj. His introduction can be really long as his work is extensive, but let's keep it brief and let's welcome our last speaker of the session, Bhai Baldeep Singh. How are you, Bhai?
Greetings to everyone. Adab, te Sat Shri Akal, Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh, Namaskar, and Buona serata da Italia.
Thank you and welcome. As we know, Bhai Sahib, you will perform one or two of your favorite songs for us from your huge collection of performances. But before that, would you please tell us how your journey in music started and what are we going to hear from you today?
Well, my journey is also related to 1947, the very unfortunate divide, which, as Dr. Gunita Bala reminded me the other day, that today, the 17th, is the day when Radcliffe drew the lines. And I represent the uncolonized Sikhs. My ancestors never shook hands with the British. So the reason why we still have the exegetical attendance of scriptures, which is clearly not the same as those of the colonized side of the country. And then I bow my head to Guru Granth Sahib, to Gurbani. The oldest author of Gurbani, if I may remind, is Bhagat Jayadev upon 1170 AD. And the second oldest author of Gurbani, of Guru Granth Sahib, is Baba Sheikh Farid, born 3 years later, 1173 AD. Guru Nanak was to be born about 3 centuries later. Then he was exactly 300 years younger to Bhagat Jayadeva, whose works he himself brings to include in the Gurbani, in this vision. So when you have a Gurbani to which we bow, the oldest author being Bhagat Jayadeva, who is also the oldest author of the Carnatic music, the author of Geet Govinda, and then you have Baba Sheikh Farid, and then you have Guru Nanak, and then you have the first disciple, first Sikh, a Muslim Sikh, Bhai Mardana Sloka, also included. He's the first amongst all the Sikhs whose works are also included. So from the Bhagat Bani, which includes Bhagat Kabir, Bhagat Ravidas, Bhagat Namdev, etc., and others, the Sheikh, the Sufi parampara, led by Baba Sheikh Farid, Pikhan Shah, and others. And then the Gurus, 6 of the Gurus, their works are included in Guru Granth Sahib. And then there are the disciples, the Gursikhs. How can I, as a Gursikh, accept the idea of a partition done in the name of religion when I am the politics of Guru Nanak, when he makes me bow in front of Gurbani? Then Guru Granth Sahib is not authored in Punjabi. There's a script, that's the Bhagavat, the vision and the rebellion of Guru Nanak. He discovered and recovered the local script, which is generally termed as Gurmukhi. But not a single translation is there in Gurbani. There are 24 languages, 120 dialects. So as someone who sings as much, Tera naam rudo roop rudo atarang rudo mero ramaiya is Marwadi in Gurbani. Gagan mai thal ravichand deepak banitar kamandal janak moti dhoop malyan lo pavan chavro kare sagal ban rai fulant jyoti kaisi aarti hoye bavkanna teri aarti anhata sabad vajant bheri. The famous aarti of Guru Nanak is not in Punjabi. it is in Maithili. The point is, how can I, as a student of Guru Nanak, accept any partition done in the name of languages even? So this idea of severance in the name of religion, and then later on the basis of languages and linguistic basis, it somehow defies the logic and the vision and the sacrifices made by those who actually have saved South Asia from the abyss it was headed otherwise. They taught us how to be different, yet be bound in the same book. That we could wear any cloth, that we could eat anything, we could eat differently, we could meditate and worship differently, yet we are in the same binding. We're done by the same doer. We share the same Karta Pur Parmeshwara, the Kartar. So we are celebrating 75 years. When I was into flying, I was shocked to hear from my granduncles that the traditions are dying. And they drew a line, right? Like Radcliffe drew, they always reminded of the line. That was a timeline, not literally the line on the map. The timeline of what the era was before partition, and then after partition, everything crumbled. Then I met Bhai Arjan Singh Tarangad, my oldest of my teachers and the most important one. He was born 1900, lived to be 95. The last 5 or 6 years he taught me and built my spine. He would say, Jadon, until the partition, before the separation, there were the Rababis, the most exalted of all singers among the Muslims. All the Darbari musicians would regard the Rababis as really the pinnacle of music from their biradari. Then there were the Gursikhs, then there were the other Vaishnav, Sakat, Shaiva, Jogi, Tantrics. There were musicians and poets from all these orders. And there was a healthy competition, as Bhai Arjan Singh Tarangad, who hailed from Pular village next to Tarantaran in Amritsar. Now it's a separate district. All of these shocked me. And at age 20, I decided, when I saw that nobody else was volunteering to recover the music that was becoming extinct, as the elders said that it's all being lost. Instruments have died. The Drupadi Rabab, the Hindustani, or it is not the Afghani Rabab. So anthropologists have called it the Hindustani or the Drupadi Rabab. That has become extinct. The Taus has become extinct. The Jodi and the Pakhawaj have gone. The Taus is gone. I went around asking for makers who would make them. None of them. So all my aero modeling skills as a champion aero modeler who's to build planes, fly, and a student of defense studies, instead of analyzing and being a war gamer and a special forces guy, I ended up analyzing heritage. And I took a decision at age 20 not to fly, to renounce my career in aviation after getting selected to be a flying pilot in the Air Force for the 147 Flying Pilots course, which started January 90. I took the plunge without having had any formal training. Of course, we all sing, as my father was there, for all Fauji kids know how to sing a little bit here there. So, but to sum up my response to your question, Azimji, is that I came in to conserve, to revive. Normally, they would say, sambhal karo. But Punjabi ji कहते हैं पहला पालता करो, first at least recover and search out. So from the ruins of South Asia, I've tried to recover anything to do with intangible, because with the intangible heritage. And I understood at age about 19, 20 that any civilization, as I wrote then, that any civilization lives in the memory of its people. You create a wedge between the knowledge-bearing or the memory-laden elders and the unassuming youth or youngsters. You have a dead civilization in the crevice, in the crack between. So I ended up recovering. I spanned, my first visit to Lahore was in 97. A very dear friend of mine, the late bureaucrat Khalid Basra, who did his musical anthropology PhD from School of Oriental African Studies at University of London. We became thick in 93, 94 when he was doing his PhD under Dr. Richard Wittes I was about to start it, etc. Also, but then I visited Lahore, a part of my field work. So I met the Talwandi exponents there. I, in fact, with the family of Raikot, I got the two brothers, Ustad Muhammad Hafiz Khan, Khandere Talwandi Wale, and his elder brother, Muhammad Afzal Khan, Khandere Talwandi Wale, for a concert because they were the patrons, royal patrons of this family. In the year 2000, I played the Jodi Pakhavaj in the residence in Lahore. So the kind of recoveries, etc., that I made, I met the Rababis, the last remaining Rababis, Paigam I interviewed, who once the moment he heard my great uncle, the legendary Baba Jwala Singh's name, he touched his ears. He says, Pai Saab, Pai Jwala Singh Thatatipe Wale. I not only remember him, I remember his music. At Dera Saab Lahore, I asked him, oh, really? You remember his music? And Chief Justice Jawad Khwaja's wife, Bibi Bina Jawad, and her daughter, I think it was Ismat, from the Harsakiya group. She was there, and he started Kabalage masaka charanana 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 raje kabalage masaka charanana. He started singing a marvel from my great uncle in Dera Saab Lahore in the year 2000 during my second visit. So it's been, my music is all to do with recovering from the ruins of South Asia that once was, the shared legacies, the harvest that was built together, where people inspired each other. They were not afraid of those who were rooted. they felt challenged and they worked hard. Poetry, you look from before, you look at the music, the weaving, the Fulkari-like intricacies. You look at the music of the day post-partition, it's bland, it's very poor, it's impoverished. Matlab, Kangali dikhti hai usme. When you go back, look at two of the oldest compositions that I have been able to recover as part of conservation. They are of Baba Sheikh Farid. I could not find any Shruti, even from South India, that of Bhagat Jayadeva. Which is a little sad for me that nobody in South Asia, at least in the known world that I have been able to map, nobody remembers Bhagat Jayadev's Shruti. They know his text. But look at this Baba Sheikh Farid. My voice is all dead, and I'm being a hippie traveler these days. I hope the Tanpura is manageable. Let me know if it is too loud. Magab gair zare nizari gamapai tay sahib ki masar na jani tay sahib ki मसार न जानी जो बन खोई पाछे पछतानी काली कोयल तू खेत गुण काली अपने प्रीतम का हम बिरहा जाली साहिब की मसार न जानी. And the second one, जासी ढोला रे जासी ढोला रे हाथ न लाए कसुंबड़े एक सुंबड़नु जल जासी ढोला रे जासी ढोला रे बेड़ा वाह वाह बंधन की वेला रे बरसर जब उछला वाह वाह तब तरन दोहे लारे हाथ न लाए कसुंबड़ एक सुंबड़नु. So this is among the lost music. We've I wonder how we could imagine a future without taking along those who saved the colors, the languages, the multiplicity of faiths in South Asia and in the world. And that's somehow what brought me. My music is more related to recovering heritage, and it was to do with intangible assets, which is the sukham or the abodh virsa. Anything in the memory, be it music, be it exegetical attendance, be it instrument making, and other things that were there, be it the ideas of the uncolonized India. I represent the uncolonized Hindustan, and therefore I'm also versed with that, with the socio-political side and the activism of that era and before.
Bhai, could you please give a little bit of the context, like what kind of performance was this, like the current music that you performed, the setting, the audience? Could you please tell us a bit about that?
Well, you see, I was talking about the intricacies. The music, for example, when you look at it is when you look at some of the schools, for example, there are schools like Patiala Gharana, all the Gharanas now, which is the 19th century post-Mughal Sultanate period, when the Delhi Darbar, Delhi Takhat was in a way disbanded or eaten up by the East India Company. The musicians and the weavers and the potters and all the excellence bearers, poets, etc., they were scattered. Mir Nasir Ali, the direct descendant of Mian Tansen, was brought by Maharaja Kapurthala. His mazar is in Kapurthala. He had a cabinet rank, I'm told. He was very senior and Tansen's direct descendant. He was about to be exiled along with Bahadur Shah Zafar. So Maharaja Kapurthala intervened because he had treaties with the British and with the British Crown. Then the Nawab of Rampur, they played an extraordinary role. Nawab Sadiq Ali Khan and others, his father and a few others. And then Kolkata, somehow, because the East India Company was somehow based, that was a capital in a way, there was wealth. The first colonized Indians, they had enterprises there was plenty of money. So they were taken up by that. When you look at the histories of some of these gharanas, like Gwalior, they call themselves Sunkar Gaiki, that it's hearsay music. The entire story about Adarang Sadarang being hidden under the takhat by the king of Gwalior. But for example, what I want to point out when I talk of intricacies, Jasit ho, so there is ma is the fourth note. Sa re ga ma. Jasi, you hear only neither, but there is a movement from the hidden movement. It's a gupt movement of or application of the swara ma. Ma, Jasi, to, and to is straight. That's what you hear, but it's not that. It's mapa, dhola, re. So this is sina basina il versus the hearsay. Hearsay is only the oral experience, but the hidden notes are only taught as part of what was called the Dhrupad genre. Now it is somehow stigmatized because Khayal and Chota Khayal and Thumri and Tappa Dadra, Khayal, etc. were all creations of the Dhrupadiyas. This musical genre did not land from the skies. But the Dhruva is simply, when you look at Bhagat Jayadeva's work, he does not write Rahao, which came to be, during the Guru's work and the Bhagat Vani. Otherwise, it was the term they used was Rahao, which is the main refrain or the asthai, so asthai dhun of a geet, of a Brahm geet. Before that, there were chants. In the chant singing from Ajay, Abhay, Abhu, Aganj, Abhanj, this is ekakshari chant, a single worded line. That is a line, everything that you need to say is said in a single word. Guru Gobind Singh's, I quoted him from his Dasambani, from his Jap. Then there is a Dui Akshari chant, the two worded lines from Guru Arjan, Dutana Sangariya, Boyangana Basariya, Anek Upariya. So two is a Titoka Pada. So three lined Dui Akshari chant, Titoka Ikpada. So this is the Rahao or the Asthai, which has three lines, but of two words each. So this is all to do with poetic literature. So this being a Dupada, there was a system of singing a Dupada when the Asthai was formed, and then there was an Antara, that is a Ikpada. Then there is a Dupada where the Sanchari is born. And then the Tipada when the Abhog is then also sums up. Asthai, Antara and Abhog. This is how advent of the singing of Pade. Pade is just a verse. Nowadays, I think somehow Dhrupad is somehow meant for heavy voices, etc. People who know less, they have stereotyped ideas. So what I sang is a Chaupada, two Chaupadas of Baba Sheikh Farid, which are the oldest living memory of Gurbani Sangeet, coming straight from Baba Sheikh Farid. Those are evidences that they're from an anthropological perspective. You see, these are two of the oldest and the most precious marvels of music from South Asia. And when you look at the intricacies, the weave, some of the rag is like the rag Suhi. The Hindustani Sangeet doesn't even know what Suhi is. Because Hindustani Sangeet even as a term, according to Professor N. Ramanathan, who's one of the top scholars who taught at Banaras Hindu University, now lives in Chennai. He's written a paper, and I'm quoting him verbatim. I've appended his entire paper, which he wrote for Shruti magazine, that the terms Karnataka Sangeet and Hindustani Sangeet are both 150 odd years old. So the music before, when you look at the history of music, there's no divide. People, the great masters, they were, in a way, they were called Chaumukhi Gavaiyas, those who could sing all forms of music. They were not biased towards one form or the other. It was seen as they honored every form of genre. They knew how to say ghazal. They knew how to say tappa. They knew how to say geet, a birha, a harsh, a khushida, gam, mausam da, bahar da, malhar da. So there was no divides like that. Nowadays, it's like the specialization. I met a doctor. I said, I'm just telling a story. On a light note, I met a doctor and I said that I have pain in this eye, sire. He says, no, but I'm a specialist of the other eye. So I said, come on, this is a strange age. Initially, if you could be a doctor, you could treat literally from the top hair to the nail. So in the era of perhaps specializations, one may euphemistically, somehow glorify the curse that we are living with. I wonder if that makes sense.
So just another question. You've told us about a lot of these gharanas. So why is Punjab, there's Patiala Gharana, then in Jalandhar had such the Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan and his gharana, his ancestors.
Hoshiarpur Sham Charasi Gharana. Jalandhar, yes. Nusrat
Exactly.
Fateh Ali Khan was from Jalandhar area. The Nazakat Ali, Salamat Ali Khan Saabs, both of them were from Sham Charasi and Hoshiarpur.
And Jagjit Singh also from Jalandhar. So what was it about
Yes.
Punjab
Was
that
a
had
was a
so
very
many
good friend
of the
of my
most...
cousin, Sada Balbir Singh Kalsi, and he studied from Kalsi Saab. They were childhood friends. I've got
So what
photos.
is it about Punjab?
Punjab is one of the seat of civilizations. You may compare it with Greek, etc., because originally it is the Sindhu. I sometimes joke that I'm a Punjabi supremacist because I somehow am amused when I went to Varanasi in 2003, and there was one very darling Panditji. He thought that, oh, what do these Sardars know about it? No, he didn't know that I'm the head of the oldest school of South Asia of percussion also. So he had no idea that I am a war horse. I mean, don't mess with me because I'm very messed up. I've been cast as a messed up fellow. Never mess. That means don't mess with me. So he, said something like, tanik tamasa dekhin, Punjab mein pakhabaj bajan lagi. He said, oh, let's have some fun. We'll get to see some nautanki, some drama, that now there's pakhabaj in Punjab as well. So it was on record. I said that, I come from the ruins of, I come from Punjab, and I accept that Vedas are taught here in Varanasi. But, I come from the land of 5 rivers where the Vedas were written. So it's lovely, study them, because I'm you are the disciple lines of our Punjabi civilization. So I'm like that. So I played pakhabaj, and I sang some chants. There was one Acharya ji, very, very, very respected elder. We were sitting in the room of Mohan Fibre Mishra, who was the head of the Sankat Mochan temple, and they have the Drupad Mela. And we were discussing, and one Acharya ji said that, the Chant Prabandh singing, Chant was taken to the heavens by the gods, and Devta log le gaye, and now it is no longer there. So I just, in my, Punjabi humor, sadi aadat hai Punjabiyan di hasna, khedna. And Guru Sahib also gives the stamp, hasandiyan, khedandiyan, uthandiyan, bethandiyan, viche huve mukti. And the very first thing he says is, one must be pleased to look at, when you meet someone, if you are not pleased, that there's a problem. So the first thing is that you should be very pleased. Hasna is not ha 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 ha. Hasna is to be, there's shades of hasna. It's just to be comforted by someone's presence is also the generic idea of hasna, that you're okay. Hasandiya, khidandiya, and then the play of life, the game of life. When you engage in projects like we are engaging in a play, and you are there and you're playing the interviewer today, and I'm the preyed one. You are the hunter. So like that's a game, we play. And uthandeya, bethandeya, uthandeya, bethandeya, viche hove mukti. You get emancipated within this. So I said that, Acharya ji, Devta log, they took the chant singing to the heavens. He nodded. I said, but then if they have taken to the heavens, then I must be one among them. I must be one of the gods. He says, what do you mean? I said, you asked me which chant you would like to hear. So he was shocked. And Mohan Fibre Mishra ji took me after that conversation on the stage, held my arm. He says, no, you're sitting on the stage next. And I sang, look at this chant I'll sing from the times of Guru Gobind Singh. It's a text of Guru Arjan Dev from the Baramaha, in very rare raga, Asavari Mel Tukhari. Again, this Tukhari doesn't exist in Hindustani Sangeet. Ghol ghumai lalna, ghol ghumai lalna, ji gurman dina, ji gurman dina, ji gurman dina. जी गुरमान दीना सुन शब्द तुम्हारा मेरा जी मेरा मन भीना है जी मेरा मन भीना मेरा मन भीना जो जल मीना लागा रंग मुरारा कीमत कही न जाए ठाकुर तेरा महल अपार सगल गुना दाते स्वामी बेनो बेनो सुनो एक दीना देहो दरस नानक बलहारी देहो दरस नानक बलहारी जीअड़ा जीअड़ा बल बल कीना. Now this, for example, the chant uniqueness is that the text goes and it never comes back to the asthai. Like normally when we hear all these film songs, the Geet concept, they all follow the Drupad genre, where there's a Rahau, there's an asthai. For example, if you have, if you look at Mehndi Hasan Khan Saab's, what is that Kalyan thing he sings in that? बड़ा फेमस है ना उनका, वो कल्याण में गाते हैं. I think recorded, composed by Niaz Hussain Shami Saab. He was the uncle of Nazakat Salamat Khan Saab. Ranjish hi sahi. Aa gaya yaad. Look at that. I think I'm getting old, huh? Azim.
Bhai Sahab, what do you mean by asthai?
You ended up
What do you
shaming
mean
me
by
now. Look. Ranjish hi sahi. I don't sing this, but just to give an evidence. Dil hi lutane ke liye ranjish hi sahi. Now this is the asthai. आप फिर से मुझे छोड़ के जाने के लिए time to recall, huh? आप फिर से मुझे छोड़ के जाने के लिए रंजिश ही सही. Now this, for example, is the asthai of the song. Rest, you can do the homework. The rest of the padas, he would sing the first stanza, second stanza, but after every one, then he would come back to the asthai. So this concept, this system is laid by the Dhurpad singing. The chota khayal, the bada khayal, the idea of a asthai and an antara, that structure is borrowed from Dhurpad. And still they would look down at these old people sang. People who don't know have an opinion about it. They don't want to know, and they've never spent 2 minutes to learn. So the chant singing versus that is that there is no dhruva, as Bhagat Jayadeva's work is, or raha, or the asthai, as later on compositions that are known. The chants were without that. They were just one line after a line. And the songs, when the dhun had become a raga, or sometimes not even, it was just a dhun, tribal lok dhun. They would have poetry. You can find that in among the dhadis, dhadi singing. They are all singing chants, mostly. The Devda chant is very, very commonly employed by them. And they are telling gathas, long prabandhs, long poetic structures where they're telling a tale. They're all in meters, different meters, etc. So all these gharanas came into being in the, they are a 19th century idea. They were, before that, I mean, how is it that I, for example, have been taught it was common. I found in 1885 work by a book called Geet Sutra Sar, written in Bangla, staff notations done by Sridhan Bandhopadhyay. And there are 4 Gurbani compositions in Kolkata in 1885 published. How is it? People knew. Likewise, look at this Mia Tansen's composition. I'll just sing one line of that. Rajan ke Raja Ma, Raja Rajan ke Raja Ma, Raja. Now this, if you look at the Bihar exponents, elders like Pandey Ramchandra Malik, they knew this. They have sung this. Their recordings of his. In Vishnupur Gharana, you go to Kolkata and other schools, they knew Tansen's work. You go to Kashmir, you go to South. The scholars would give you evidence if they, you ask them who was Tansen, who was Swami Haridas, who was Naik Bakshu, Naik Baiju, etc. They would come up. It was like having a library. But nowadays, things have gone. Anyway, I digress.
Yes, thank you for that wonderful, firstly, some wonderful history of Punjab and Punjabi music. And thank you for preserving all of this, I wouldn't say ancient, but all of this old traditional music, the ragas and everything that you're doing. And
don't call heritage old. We'll have a fight.
I mean, like, just chronologically.
Like I say that I'm not aging. I've become heritage. So
that's a very nice museum. I'll use that myself as well. Thank you very much, Bhai Sahib. And please stay with us backstage. And we've arrived at the end of the series. Thank you, all of you, for joining us. Now my co-host Aprajita and I would like to deliver a thank you to the audience. Thank you for being our support and showing us your love. Your love and support has made this series possible and kept motivating us to do it. Thank you for supporting the work we do. And not.
I can maybe sing okay, okay, go ahead.
Love and support has made this series possible and kept motivating us to do it. Thank you.
Okay, so I would like to begin my thank you note. Yeah. So it seems pretty unbelievable that we have come to the end of this beautiful journey. It seemed a big uphill task at the beginning, but we have climbed each day and we have finally reached here. And I would really like to thank Dr. Gunita Singh Bhalla and the archive for giving me this opportunity to learn and grow. Achal, who was there every day at the back end, really encouraged me to do better than I could. And I would also like to thank the audience who showed interest in the discussions and they could make the most of this painstakingly beautiful endeavor and initiative that was taken by the archive to commemorate the 75th anniversary of partition. It demanded a lot of commitment and, most importantly, dedication to the cause that we are all concerned with here. It makes me pretty proud that we could all make it till here together as a team. Azim and I and Dr. Gunita Singh Bhalla, of course, and Sonam Kalra were there. So with all the esteemed speakers involving themselves in keeping the dialogue on partition running and engaging. But it also makes me a little sad that there won't be any more evenings of meeting and talking to all these thinkers, intellectuals, researchers who have made the partition studies what it is. Thus, I would just like to, say and end and on this note that we should celebrate endings for they precede new beginnings. Thank you.
Yeah.